Well, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Bethany, and I'm a librarian at Haggard Library. With me today is Trey, another Haggard librarian. Trey will be watching the chat for any questions you may have during the program. But before we go any further, I'd really like to find out what brought you to this program today. We have a little poll for you. So why are you here today? Are you already conducting family oral histories but want to know more? Are you interested in doing oral histories but you don't know where to begin? Or you're here because what's an oral history? We'll give it a minute or so to see if people want to reply. And we'll reveal the results. Okay, let's go ahead and end polling. So it looks like most people are here just to find out where to begin, and that you might already have a good idea about what oral histories are. And we have a couple people who have already started on their oral history journey. So that's great. Thanks so much for being here today. Whoops. So whether you are here to find out what an oral history is, or you're well on your way and looking for tips, this program will have something for you. We'll start today by defining oral history, and then I'll tell you about some organizations that promote good oral history practices. We'll also spend time on the 10 steps to completing a family oral history interview. And at the end, I'll share other Plano Public Library genealogy webinars that you can watch 24/7 on our website. I hope that what you learn here today will give you confidence in getting started with your own family oral histories. So what is an oral history? Are the stories that you hear from your mother, your grandfather, your cousins, your siblings, are those oral histories? Well, they can be if you record them. They will be. An oral history is a sound recording of historical information obtained through an interview that preserves a person's life history or eyewitness account of a past experience. So simply put, an oral history tells a story. An oral history interview records someone's experiences, recollections, thoughts, and feelings from a certain time period or about a particular event. The practice of oral history has been around from before people began writing, and today's technology has made it very easy to take an oral history. Different organizations have developed methods and procedures for conducting oral histories for individuals, residents of specific locations, extended families, and people who have lived through the same event, like a war, social change, or pandemic. Many universities, archives, museums, and libraries have oral history programs with highly evolved standards and rules. The 10 steps that I'll show you came out of these practices, recommendations, and techniques. First off, let's talk about the Baylor Institute of Oral History, located right here in Texas. The Baylor Institute of Oral History creates oral histories of people who are eyewitnesses to history. It provides both physical and digital access to these materials for those interested in the stories. The Baylor Institute of Oral History is a sponsoring member of the Oral History Association. It hosts the Texas Oral History Association. It participates in H Oral Hist, a popular oral history online discussion forum, and it is active in the International Oral History Association. The Institute provides people with a host of mostly free resources, including an oral history manual, workshops, webinars, and a transcribing guide. Next up, StoryCorps. You may have seen StoryCorps shorts. These are animated shorts that are produced by PBS and StoryCorps and broadcast on PBS. StoryCorps is an American nonprofit organization whose mission is to record, preserve, and share the stories of Americans from all backgrounds and beliefs. StoryCorps grew out of a project founded in 2003. It models itself on the WPA, which began recording oral histories of people in the United States in the 1930s. It also takes inspiration from Studs Terkel, a 20th century American author and oral historian known for his oral histories of common Americans. You can participate in one of StoryCorps' many ongoing oral history projects, and you can view them on their website. And it's an interesting fact, but all of the StoryCorps oral histories are archived at the Library of Congress. So if you take part in one of their projects, you will be part of American history. So what does the StoryCorps have for you? Their resources and guidance for using the StoryCorps method for conducting oral histories can be found on their website under StoryCorps DIY. It has some really good resources. This next organization is quite a mouthful. The Smithsonian Institution Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage. This is a research and educational unit of the Smithsonian Institution, and it has a free online guide about conducting oral histories, which includes a selected bibliography, internet resources, and sample forms, which are really fantastic. You can also download this guide as a PDF. Last but not least, the Oral History Association. Their website states, since 1966, the Oral History Association has served as the principal membership organization for people committed to the value of oral history. OHA works with other organizations to foster best practices and encourage support for oral history and oral historians. It has an international membership and it serves a broad and diverse audience. The OHA encourages standards of excellence in the collection, preservation, dissemination, and uses of oral testimony, and it has established a set of goals, guidelines, and evaluation standards for oral history interviews, including best practices for those who conduct oral histories. So what does the OHA have for you? Well, the OHA offers a rich variety of resources, including a listserv that you can subscribe to, web guides, and a curated list of centers and collections that have significant oral history collections. I recommend you pay a visit to all these websites where you can learn more about the practice of oral history. Again, links to each of these organizations and their resources will be included in the resource guide. So when you get the resource guide, check them out. Any questions so far?
No, we're good so far.
Great. Now you know where to find good information about oral history practice. But who can conduct an oral history? Just anyone? Well, the answer is yes, anyone can conduct an oral history. Kids, parents, grandparents. It's a great activity for a family to do together. I used the 10 steps that I developed to conduct an oral history with my mom. It was a lot of fun and surprise. I did learn some things about my mom that I didn't know before. So be prepared for some surprises. So why would you want to do an oral history? Well, your family has a unique insight into the world. Their experiences describe their families and the communities that they grew up in. They have a story worth saving. There are all kinds of reasons that you might want to capture a family member's oral history. It could be that you just like to spend time with your family members and you like hearing their stories. So there's a social aspect to it. You may want to use your family's oral histories as a starting point or a supplement to your family genealogy research. And perhaps you want to save your loved ones' memories before they are unable to tell them again. So with all these reasons to capture your family's memories, what's holding you back? Let's take a look at the 10 steps to a family history. For each step, I've included a tip or bonus point, an additional step or two that will make your oral history more complete or easier, but they aren't totally necessary. Some of these bonus points are directly related to what I learned from conducting my mom's oral history. Just remember, I walked so that you can run. So here are the 10 steps to completing a family history interview. Number 1, decide who you want to interview, an important first step. Contact your family member and get their permission. We'll talk more about this. Perform background research so that you have an understanding of where they're coming from. Prepare topic lists. Set a time and a place for the interview. Record your interview. I know that you're thinking some of these seem very self-explanatory, but it's good to have a list. Very important. Thank your family member. Maybe most important, save your interview. Sharing your interview is part of the reason that you're even doing this. And number 10, have fun. So now that we've gone through the list quickly, let's break them down step by step. Step 1, decide who you want to interview. This may be the easiest part, deciding who in your family you want to interview. You might start with those family members you are closest to, like your parents, grandparents, or siblings. Your choice may be based on time. Whose stories are you most likely to lose first? Bonus point, don't jump into it. Plan. Possibly the most important part of the oral history process is in the planning and preparation. I really like how StoryCorps puts it. Prepare, record, save, and share. I have 2 forms to share with you that will help you in your planning and preparation. The biographical information sheet and the interview release form. I'll talk about them next. The biographical information sheet that you will receive in the follow-up resource guide has a section where you can record important information such as the date and time of the interview, the recording method you'll be using, and the type of file that will be saved. This form is for your loved one to fill out, so it will also give you important information about them. The interview release form has a field where you can record the file name that you will use to save your recording file. Here's some advice on file naming. Establish how you will name your audio or video files before you do your interview. Give files a name that includes information about your family member and the time of the interview. It's a good idea to number them if you think you will be doing more than one. Make sure to include a leading 0, which will allow your numbers to sort numerically once they pass 9. So for example, in this example, I've used my mother's initials and her last name, the date of the interview, and then 01, because I may make as many as 99 oral history interviews with my mom, and this way they will all sort correctly. When saving your digital recordings on a hard drive, create consistent file and folder names so that they can be easily recognized and retrieved using your computer's search function. Step 2, contact your family member and get their permission. Let them know that you would like to record an oral history interview of them and explain why you want to interview them. Obviously, it's because they are fascinating and their memories are precious. Let them know what the process will entail. They will provide you with some biographical background about themselves using the biographical information sheet. You will use this information to put together a list of topics to guide the interview, which you will share with your family member ahead of time. Together, you will decide on where and when to record the interview. I called my mom and I told her I wanted to interview her for an oral history. She had some questions about the process and she wondered why I wanted to do it. I told her that I wanted to preserve her unique experiences for future family. I also wanted to test out the 10 steps for conducting an oral history. I wanted her to feel at ease, so we spent some time talking about the project, and I emailed her the biographical information sheet and the interview release form to look over. Bonus point, have them sign a legal release form. You could record the interview without a release, but it will limit what you can do with the interview later. The interview release form protects you and your family member's copyright for the interview. There's a place on the form where your family member can provide a description of how they want to restrict access to their interview to protect their privacy. For instance, my mom wrote that only she or I would be able to use portions of the interview for educational purposes, like this webinar. With a legal release, the interview that you make, a part of history, can also become a primary document that provides historical information for future generations. At some point, you and your family may decide to donate the interview to a local historical society or university. Check with each institution to find out what kind of donor agreement they need. Step 3, perform background research. Researching the historic periods that your family member lived through will help you develop topics to talk to them about. What major historic events happened during the lifetime of your family member? What wars, disease outbreaks, technology changes, social changes, and environmental disasters did they live through? Ask your family member about their memories of these major events. What was it like to live during the Cold War? Or tell me about getting the polio vaccine. There are several websites that I used to gather background information about Muskegon, Michigan, where my mom grew up. I started with the Historical Society of Michigan website, and this gave me great online and in-person resources for vital records and land records. You can check with the state your family member grew up to find out if they have a historical society. Ancestry.com is a popular online genealogy website. It has a great feature called Maps. When you click on the Learning Center and then click on Maps, it'll bring up a map of the world, and you can zero in on a map of the United States and then click on the state where your family member grew up. This will give you access to vital records resources for that state. It's a great way to learn about the place that your family member comes from. And remember, Ancestry.com is always available from any Plano library computer. And in fact, through June 2021, it's available for you to log in from home using your library card number. Decade by Decade publications are another great resource. This is the one featured is 1950s. It's a great place you can find these books at the library. Some are reference materials that you'll have to use while you're in the library, but many of them are ones that you can check out and take home. To find these books in the catalog, search by series for the keyword decades. So you're looking for books about decades. Finally, Wikipedia, the free encyclopedia, is actually a great starting point for gathering basic information, and it can help you find other places to look. Bonus point, check out local historical societies from your family's hometown. County and state historical societies and governments may have timelines available that are specific to where your family member lived. You can also find out if any programs exist that your family member could contribute to with their oral history, their photos, or memorabilia. So remember, act local, think global. If you grew up in Plano, you should definitely contact us if you have family photos that you would like to include in the Collin County images, or if you have other kinds of Items that are specific to Plano, the library would be very interested in seeing them. Step 4, prepare topic lists. Instead of writing out a list of questions, you will develop topic lists. You will share the topic lists with your family member prior to the interview so they won't be surprised by what you want to talk about. Use the topic lists as a guide for asking questions. Talking about one topic may lead to another, something that you hadn't even thought about asking, but is important to your family member. And remember, it's their story to tell. Broad topics that you can cover are family descriptions, health histories, education, family folklore and cultural traditions, and, as we discussed already, major historical events. The resource guide has links to suggested topics. Bonus point, learn how to ask questions. Get in the habit of using open-ended questions in your interview. Use open-ended questioning to explore topics together. Open-ended questions are questions that can't be answered with a simple yes or no. They prompt people to give full and expansive answers. They can be phrased as a request, like tell me about or describe. Open-ended questions create flowing narratives that seed more questions and bring to light more memories and anecdotes. Closed-ended questions can be answered with a short sentence or one word, often yes or no. Closed-ended questions have a time and a place in an interview. Use them to clarify statements. For example, to clarify someone's name, you might say, your uncle gave you a silver dollar whenever he visited. Was that Uncle George Antonopoulos? Or to obtain information, you might ask, which aunt did you spend summers with as a child? Closed-ended questions verify and confirm. Here's an example of a closed-ended question that I use to find out more about my mom's name. Your legal name is Sophia Mattina Ross. Is that right?
Right.
So do you normally go by Sophia?
No, I never really go by Sophia. I go by Mattina.
Okay.
Which, as you know, is actually in Greek stamata, which becomes stamatina, and diminutive, and then anglicized to Mattina.
Okay. And why is stamata an important name in our family?
Well, I'm named after both my great-grandmother and my grandmother.
So I wanted to verify information about how she used her name, what she went by, and that's why I asked that yes or no question. But then in her answer, even though she said definitively yes or no, she said no, I go by Mattina, she then expounded on her answer, and it became kind of an open-ended question in the end. Just remember that getting names correct is especially important if you are using this information for your genealogical research. In this example, I verified my mother's name, and I also learned the history behind it. Step 5, set a time and a place for your interview. As the interviewer, you will schedule the appointment and make sure that the session is recorded. Talk to your family member and select a time of day that is good for them, when they will have the least number of distractions and when they will have the most energy. Ask them when the garbage is being picked up or when the school bus goes by, and do not schedule for those times. You don't want any outside noise interrupting your interview. The Oral History Association's online guide, Remote Interviewing Resources, includes a decision tree to help you decide between an in-person or remote interview. They also have numerous resources that will help you plan for a remote interview, including case studies and projects that you can view to get an idea of what these oral history interviews look like. Select a recording device. Based on whether you choose in-person or remote interviews, select the recording device. Some options are video recorder, handheld tape recorder, computer with camera and microphone, or smartphone or tablet. My advice, Choose a recording device that best fits your budget and is the easiest for you to use. Bonus point, check your equipment. Since my mom and dad live in another state, we decided the easiest way to record our interview would be using the cloud-based video conferencing platform, Zoom. During the pandemic, we have been using Zoom several times a month to connect with each other and with my sister and her family. It will be a snap, we thought. Well, this is the point when I caution you to check your tech equipment and your software before you get started. Even better, schedule a practice session to really make sure you know what you're doing. As it was, I started the Zoom and I couldn't hear my mom talking, even though she wasn't muted. After a couple of minutes of long distance troubleshooting involving my dad, a smartphone, a landline phone, and 2 iPads, we finally got the sound to work. Step 6, record your interview. When you press record, make an introductory statement that includes your name, your family member's name, what you will be doing, the date, and the time. For example, I said, "This is Bethany Ross. Today is Saturday, April 3rd, 2021. I am interviewing for the first time my mother, Sophia Mattina Ross. This interview is taking place remotely at her home." Just think about all the detective shows you've ever watched. This is your opportunity to put it down in the recording. Active listening. Practice it. Speak one at a time and try not to speak over each other. Ask one question at a time. Follow up on a question before moving on to the next one. And save weightier questions for the middle of the interview after your family member has kind of gotten used to the interview process. Make a concluding statement stating that the interview is ending. Give your family member the opportunity to add any last-minute information they want to at this point. For example, you might say, "We're about to end this interview. Is there anything more that you'd like to tell me about?" Bonus point, remind them to hydrate. It's really important that your family member is comfortable during the interview. Keep an eye on them, and if they seem to be flagging, remind them to drink some water. Here's a clip of my mom talking about the Good Friday service that began the Greek Easter weekend.
So getting back to Easter, and so the Easter service begins at midnight and it goes until 2 in the morning. Depends, because there are lots of special songs both at Good Friday and leading up to Easter, from the beginning of Lent, that are sung, and that's the same thing at the Easter service. And when I was living at home as a child and all the way through high school, I sang in the choir the entire time.
In Greek?
Always in Greek, which is ironic that I'm now really studying Greek when I was, singing in it for, all of my early life. So that service goes on for a long time.
Remember to take a drink if you need it.
Good idea.
I'm going to drink too.
My trusty Coke bottle.
So as you can see from the clip, I prompted her to take a drink when I noticed that she was getting a little parched. And I really love that she reminded me that she was using her favorite Coke bottle, because we find those mini Coke bottles all over her house and in her car, half filled with water, and it always makes me laugh. So it's a real part of who my mom is. Step 7, thank your family member. Don't forget to thank them for taking the time to share their memories and experiences with you. They've ensured that future generations will have a better understanding of your family and of the world. Hopefully the interview was enjoyable for them and they will be happy to do more. Bonus point, Send a follow-up note, email a thank you, or send one via snail mail. Just make sure that you follow up with a thank you to let them know that you appreciate their time. And thank you so much for sharing about Greek Easter traditions and your memories about Greek Easter, and because they're my memories too. So I really appreciate that. And I will end the recording.
Efaristopoli, thank you very much for inviting me.
Step 8, save your interview. What happens after you stop recording? Often the device that you use to record the interview will assign a random file name to your interview, like this illustration shows. So save your file using the naming convention that you developed during your planning phase. Save your original and then don't do anything with it other than name it. Places that you can save your files are a computer hard drive, a flash or thumb drive, or the cloud. For example, Apple iCloud, Google Drive, Microsoft OneDrive, or Dropbox. There are pros and cons to each storage location. I will say that it's easier to share files that are stored in the cloud, but these services may cost money and you'll have to keep track of the passwords. Also, be aware that file formats change over time, so you need to be careful and convert your files as necessary. Bonus point, use the LOCKS system. LOCKS means lots of copies keep stuff safe. And it really just means that you want to make one or more copies of your original files and save these copies in multiple locations. Number 9, step 9, share your interview. After you've saved your interview, it's a good idea to summarize it. Write a brief, one-paragraph summary of the interview. Include the major topics that were discussed. You might consider indexing your recording or video. Indexing shows the timestamp for when major topics are discussed during the interview on the recording. Having a summary and index makes it easier for people to know at a glance what the recording is about. You might think about transcribing the interview. And why would you do that? So people can read it. This is especially important to the hearing impaired, but there are other great reasons for transcribing your interview. Transcription makes the oral history easy to share, easy to archive, because paper actually lasts longer than almost any other type of recording, and it makes it printable. Baylor University's Transcribing Style Guide has clear steps for transcription, so look for a link to it in the resource guide. Now imagine that you've completed steps 1 through 8, and you've created a summary, an index, and a transcription of your oral history. All that's left is sharing it with family and friends. Of course, abiding by the terms your family member agreed to in their release form. Some ways that you might share are donating a copy to a historical society or local archive, creating and printing a keepsake book to share with family members, or putting together a slideshow to share at a family get-together. Bonus point, caption your interview. You can create automatic captions for your interview file using YouTube and YouTube Studio Auto Caption for subtitles. You can make your file private, and you can even use the captioning to transcribe your oral history. It did a really fairly accurate job with this clip about my great-grandmother's Easter soup. One moment.
Well, my mother made, roast lamb with roast potatoes and spaghetti and Greek salad and spanakopita and tiropitas.
My mouth is watering.
And my grandmother used to make a soup called margarita, I think, which I disliked enormously because it was made with innards. And I still have the image of watching my grandmother take lamb intestines and clean them by putting a pencil through them. And it didn't, to my taste, it did not smell very good either when I was cooking, but that's a traditional soup.
Texas homeowners, if you have a power meter like this on the side of your house, you can qualify.
Sorry about that. So getting back to captioning, I will say again, I was amazed by how accurate YouTube was at understanding what my mom and I were saying. And it creates a text file that you can go in and edit. And you can also edit when the words appear on the screen. So it takes a little bit of getting in there and playing around with it. It's not necessarily super straightforward, but it's not that hard. And I thought it did a great job. So just remember, YouTube captioning. All right, on to step 10. Probably the most important step, have fun. By now, you've followed the steps 1 through 9, meaning you've prepared, recorded, saved, and shared the interview of your family member. This last step is the easiest. It only takes a positive attitude. So be kind to your family member and be kind to yourself. You will both learn more about the process, and it will become easier as you do more interviews. Bonus point, do it again. I'm really excited to keep going with this oral history of my family. Next up, interviewing my dad. So I hope that you learned some useful tips today. Before we go, I'd like to remind you about other genealogy webinars that might be relevant. But first, I'd like to know if you have attended or watched any of the following library webinars. So we have one more poll. Have you attended Papers in the Attic, Create a Family Book, Digitization Basics, or Oral Histories? All right, we'll give it another couple seconds. See if anyone else will respond. Well, we may have one person who's gone to get a drink of water, so I think we can go ahead and end polling and reveal the poll results. Okay, so that's really great to see so many of you have already attended the oral history webinar. And I'm glad to see people have attended Papers in the Attic. Let me tell you a little bit about all of these. Papers in the Attic teaches you how to preserve old documents and photos, so that's really helpful in keeping your family archive together. Create a Family Book is a 3-part video series that provides suggestions to get the whole family involved in making an awesome family keepsake. So keep that in mind when you're doing your oral history. You can watch Create a Family Book and use all of that information that you got in your oral history to make a fabulous book. Digitization Basics shows you how to create your own digitized personal archive. Again, this would be a fantastic component to your oral history, knowing how to digitize images that correspond to the oral history. And of course, we have another webinar on oral histories. Many of you have already attended. It just had a more in-depth look at best practices. So I definitely, for a bonus point, if you haven't watched that webinar yet, please do so. So some upcoming webinars from the Genealogy Center. We've got History of DNA Analysis, where you can explore a brief history of DNA analysis. Where in the World is He? Learn how to begin locating your immigrant ancestors. And Ancestry Library Edition, where you can learn basic site navigation to discover available resources and tools to help you search for your family. Those are all coming up in the next couple weeks. So does anyone have any questions? You can always contact us at genealogy@plano.gov. And we will get back to you as best with answers to your questions. Well, I appreciate you coming today, and I hope you found something useful, and I'm excited for you with your oral history journey ahead of you. So thank you so much.